So, Liberian government, let me say this very respectfully, shame on you. So, I was watching a live section where some civilians in Liberia were protesting in solidarity of Ibrahim Traoré, Sahel State and Burkina Faso, where the police officer came, you can see on the picture, and tell them to stop or else they will be arrested. And mind you, it was a very peaceful protest. A Pan-African revolution is erupting, and at the heart of this upheaval is Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a 37-year-old military captain who has become the embodiment of African resistance, dignity, and self-determination. On Wednesday, April 30, 2025, thousands of Africans, from Burkina Faso to Ghana, Liberia to beyond, poured into the streets, their voices united under the defiant cry of "Hands off! These and long live Captain Traoré!" These protests, sparked by a foiled coup attempt allegedly orchestrated from Ivory Coast and inflammatory remarks by U.S. AFRICOM Commander General Michael Langley, have not only rallied Burkina Faso but ignited a Pan-Africanist fervor that has left African leaders trembling, embarrassed, and exposed. For the first time in modern history, citizens of one African nation are taking to the streets to defend the leader of another while their own presidents languish in the shadows of public disdain. This is no ordinary moment, it's a revolution of consciousness, and Traoré is its torchbearer. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, the place de la Revolution was transformed into a sea of defiance as thousands rallied in support of Captain Traoré and his military junta. The demonstrations were a direct response to a major plot uncovered on April 21, 2025, which Burkina Faso's military authorities claimed was orchestrated from neighboring Ivory Coast to overthrow Traoré and sow total chaos. Adding fuel to the fire, General Michael Langley's April 3 testimony before the U.S. Senate, where he accused Traoré of misusing Burkina Faso's gold reserves for personal gain, was perceived as a blatant imperialist attack. Protesters in Ouagadougou waved Burkina Faso and Russian flags, a nod to Traoré's pivot toward non-Western alliances, and brandished banners denouncing Langley, some scrawling slave across his image in bold red ink. "Long live Captain Traoré," they chanted, their voices echoing a resolute rejection of foreign interference. But what makes this moment historic is its continental and global reach. In Monrovia, Liberia, citizens defied their government to stage a peaceful Africa March for Freedom under the banner of solidarity with Traoré. On Wednesday, a group of Liberian protesters marched to the Ivorian embassy, their placards blazing with anti-imperialist slogans. They accused Ivory Coast and the United States of colluding to destabilize Burkina Faso, demanding that both nations desist from meddling in the internal governance of Burkina Faso. Their statement was unequivocal. The people of Burkina Faso deserve peace. President Traoré is delivering meaningful development and must be allowed to continue serving his people. The protesters attempted to deliver petitions to other diplomatic missions but were halted by Liberia's national police, who cited a lack of protest permits. In a chilling escalation, Liberian authorities arrested some demonstrators and issued threats, signaling the depth of unease Traoré's influence is causing among African elites. In Accra, Ghana, the socialist movement of Ghana led a solidarity rally declaring Traoré a symbol of African dignity and resistance. Ghanaians to join the chorus of Hands Off the AES, a reference to the Alliance of Sahel States, the Revolutionary Confederation of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger that has become a bulwark against neocolonialism. Remarkably, citizens from across Africa, including those from countries as far afield as South Africa and Nigeria, either traveled to Ouagadougou or organized parallel protests in their own capitals. Sekou Ansumariam Dakali, a Liberian protester who journeyed to Burkina Faso, captured the sentiment perfectly. "I came to Ouagadougou today, too, to participate in this demonstration in support of Captain Ibrahim Traoré because he represents hope for Africa, hope for black people, hope for all freedom fighters around the globe." Even beyond Africa, diaspora communities and anti-imperialist activists in Europe and the Americas took to the streets, amplifying Traoré's message of sovereignty. To understand why Captain Ibrahim Traoré has ignited such unprecedented support, we must first examine the man and his mission. Since seizing power in a September 2022 coup, the second that year, Traoré has positioned himself as a modern-day Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary icon often dubbed Africa's Che Guevara. At just 34 when he took power, Traoré promised to restore security, dignity, and prosperity to a nation ravaged by jihadist insurgencies and neocolonial exploitation. Unlike many African leaders who pay lip service to progress while cozying up to Western powers, Traoré has walked the talk with audacious, people-centered policies. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has expelled French military forces, terminated exploitative mining agreements, and rejected the CFA franc, a colonial-era currency that shackles West African economies to France. Traoré has redirected national wealth toward grassroots development, investing in education, healthcare, and food security despite crippling illegal sanctions from Western powers. His nationalization of Burkina Faso's gold reserves, a move that enraged General Langley, ensures that the country's resources benefit its people, not foreign corporations. We will mine our gold ourselves, not for France, not for the West, but for our people, Traoré declared, a statement that has become a rallying cry across the continent. Traoré's defiance of imperialism is matched by his commitment to regional unity. As a key architect of the AES, he has forged a confederation with Mali and Niger, all of which have expelled French troops and prioritized African solutions to African problems. This alliance, formalized on July 6, 2024, represents a radical departure from the Western-dominated economic community of West African states, ICAOWAS, which Traoré has accused of serving imperialist interests. His vision of a new Africa, free from imperialism and neocolonialism, resonates deeply with a generation of Africans disillusioned by leaders who prioritize foreign approval over domestic progress. But it's not just policy that endears Traoré to the masses, it's his authenticity. A shy schoolboy turned counterterrorism captain, Traoré is a man of the people, often seen in military fatigues rather than the opulent suits favored by Africa's political elite. His speeches are direct, unfiltered, and laced with the truths that pierce the veil of neocolonial deceit. This continent has suffered and continues to suffer from the fire of the colonial deceit. This continent has suffered and continues to suffer from the fire of the imperialists, he declared at the EASE summit in Niamey, Niger on July 6, 2024. Such words are not mere rhetoric, they are a call to action, galvanizing Africans to reclaim their destiny. The outpouring of support for Traoré has cast a harsh spotlight on African leaders, many of whom are now grappling with embarrassment and fear. The sight of their own citizens marching for a foreign leader while ignoring or openly criticizing their own presidents is a public relations disaster and a stark indictment of their failures. In Liberia, President. A public relations disaster and a stark indictment of their failures. In Liberia, President to face arrests and threats for expressing solidarity. The heavy-handed response betrays a deeper anxiety. If Liberians are willing to risk their freedom for a Burkinabe leader, what does that say about their faith in Bokai's government? In Ivory Coast, Joseph Bokai's administration was caught flat-footed as citizens rallied for Traoré. Only Ident Alassane Ouattara faces accusations of being a dedicated US-EU-NATO collaborator, with protesters in Monrovia and Ouagadougou alleging that his government is a staging ground for plots against Traoré. These claims, echoed by Burkina Faso's military authorities, have intensified tensions between the two nations, with Traoré himself accusing Ivory Coast of harboring destabilizers. The protests outside the Ivorian embassy in Monrovia were a humiliating blow to Ouattara, exposing his vulnerability to public dissent and undermining his regional influence. Across the continent, leaders like Nigeria's Bola Tinubu and Kenya's William Ruto are watching with trepidation. Their citizens' participation in pro-Traoré protests signals a growing rejection of the status quo. Governments that rely on IMF loans, Western military bases, and extractive industries to prop up their regimes. As one Ghanaian protester put it, our leaders borrow billions from the West, but what do we see? Inflation, unemployment, and excuses. Traoré is building schools and hospitals with Burkina Faso's gold. Why can't our president do the same? This sentiment, echoed in exposts and street demonstrations, underscores the shame of leaders who have failed to inspire or deliver. Traoré's rise exposes a painful truth. African leaders are not getting this support because they have not earned it. Many have presided over economies that enrich foreign corporations while impoverishing their people. They sign military pacts with France and the U.S., allowing foreign troops to operate on African soil while jihadist insurgencies fester. They cling to power through rigged elections or constitutional manipulation, alienating their youth who see no future under their rule. In contrast, Traoré's Burkina Faso, though not without challenges, is a beacon of hope, a nation daring to chart its own path despite immense external pressure. Captain Traoré's greatest weapon is his willingness to speak truths that African leaders would rather bury. He has called out the hypocrisy of Western powers and their African proxies with a clarity that resonates far beyond Burkina Faso. If you want to break with these imperialist forces, it's simple. We must denounce the agreements, he urged in January 2025, slamming French President Emmanuel Macron's claim that African leaders should thank Paris for its military presence. Traoré's retort that Macron was insulting all Africans electrified the continent, exposing the condescension of former colonial powers and the complicity of African leaders who uphold such arrangements. Traoré has also challenged the narrative of African dependency, rejecting the idea that the continent needs Western aid or intervention to thrive. We have proof. Tracks have been laid. Soldiers are equipped, he said in July 2024, accusing France, Benin, and Ivory Coast of orchestrating destabilization efforts against Burkina Faso by naming names and presenting evidence. Traoré has forced African leaders to confront their role in perpetuating neocolonial networks. His accusations against Ivory Coast, in particular, have strained diplomatic ties but emboldened activists who see Ouattara as a pawn of Western interests. Perhaps most damning is Traoré's critique of African leaders' failure to unite. At the AES summit, he spoke of a continent suffering from the fire of the imperialists and called for a confederation that prioritizes African sovereignty over Western appeasement. This vision directly challenges ECOWAS, which many view as a tool of French and American influence. By forging the AES with Mali and Niger, Traoré has shown that African unity is possible without Western oversight, a prospect that terrifies leaders who rely on external validation to maintain power. The protests supporting Traoré have instilled fear in African leaders for several reasons. First, they highlight a growing Pan-Africanist consciousness that transcends national borders. The fact that Ghanaians, Liberians, and others are rallying for a Burkinabe leader suggests that loyalty is shifting from individual governments to a broader vision of African liberation. This is a nightmare scenario for presidents who depend on nationalist rhetoric or ethnic divisions to maintain control. Second, Traoré's popularity exposes the fragility of their own legitimacy. When Liberians risk arrest to protest outside the Ivorian embassy, or when Ghanaians chant Traoré's name while ignoring Akufo-Addo, it sends a clear message. The social contract between African leaders and their people is broken. The arrests in Liberia, in particular, reveal a desperate attempt to suppress this awakening, but such measures only fuel public resentment. As one ex-post warned, the CIA warns that leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré could influence African leaders and Africa may become a superpower in under 15 years. This fear of a Traoré-inspired domino effect is palpable among elites. Third, Traoré's defiance of Western powers raises the stakes for African leaders who collaborate with them. His expulsion of French troops and rejection of the CFA franc have inspired calls for similar actions in countries like Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Cameroon. Leaders who host Western military bases or sign IMF deals now face increasing scrutiny from their citizens who see Traoré as proof that another path is possible. The protests with their citizens who see Traoré as proof that another path is possible. The protests with their Africa, a trend that threatens the political survival of pro-Western regimes. The support for Traoré extends beyond Africa, amplifying his influence and the embarrassment of African leaders. In the African diaspora, particularly in the United States, anti-imperialist slogans and Russian flags signal a rejection of the West's grip on AIDS. In Europe, activists have organized solidarity rallies, drawing parallels between Traoré's struggle and global fights against imperialism. Social media platforms like X are ablaze with posts hailing Traoré as a revolutionary hero. One user declared, "Everyone with a black skin on earth must stand with Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso," reflecting the global resonance of his message. This international dimension underscores why Traoré's leadership is so threatening. Unlike African leaders who caught Western approval at Davos or the UN, Traoré speaks to the grassroots, youth, workers, and the disenfranchised. His alignment with Russia and China, while controversial, is seen as a strategic move to counter Western dominance, not a blind embrace of new masters. Either we agree to fight for our country or we remain slaves forever, Traoré declared in response to U.S. threats, a statement that has gone viral among activists worldwide. As the dust settles from the April 30th protests, one thing is clear. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has changed the game. His leadership has not only galvanized Burkina Faso but sparked a Pan-Africanist renaissance that is forcing African leaders to confront their own inadequacies. The fear and shame they feel are not just personal, they reflect a deeper crisis of legitimacy in a continent yearning for true independence. For the people, Traoré represents hope, a leader who dares to dream of an Africa free from the shackles of imperialism, where resources serve the many, not the few. For African leaders, he is a mirror reflecting their failures, a reminder that power without purpose is fleeting. As one Burkinabe protester, Haroun Sawadogo, warned, if they want to eliminate Captain Traoré, they should eliminate the people first. This is the heart of Traoré's revolution, a movement rooted in the will of the people, unstoppable by arrests, threats, or coups. The protests of April 30th, 2025 are a wake-up call for Africa. They signal a new era where citizens are no longer content with leaders who bow to foreign powers or prioritize personal gain over public welfare. Traoré's truths about imperialism, unity, and self-reliance are reshaping the continent's political landscape, exposing the cowardice of those who cling to the old order. As Africans from Liberia to Ghana, from Ouagadougou to the diaspora rally behind this young captain, they are not just supporting a man, they are reclaiming their future. And for African leaders watching from their palaces, the message is clear: adapt or be left behind. As I conclude, brothers and sisters of this great continent, please allow me say this. The thunderous protests of April 30th, 2025 have etched Captain Ibrahim Traoré's name into the annals of African history, not as a mere leader, but as a catalyst for a continent-wide awakening. From the vibrant streets of Ouagadougou to the defiant marches in Monrovia and Accra, Africans have spoken with one voice, rallying behind a young Burkinabe captain who embodies their aspirations for dignity, sovereignty, and self-determination. This unprecedented show of solidarity, spanning borders and oceans, has laid bare a stark reality. The old guard of African leadership is teetering on the edge of obsolescence. To survive and thrive, African leaders must shed their egos, embrace Traoré's revolutionary blueprint, and align with the will of their people. The alternative is a future where they are sidelined by a generation that refuses to accept mediocrity. Traoré's meteoric rise offers a masterclass in leadership rooted in courage, authenticity, and service. His bold moves, expelling foreign troops, nationalizing resources, and forging the alliance of Sahel states, demonstrate that African nations can chart their own destinies without bowing to external pressures. His unapologetic rhetoric, calling out neocolonialism and its enablers, has struck a chord with the populace weary of leaders who prioritize foreign alliances over domestic progress. The sight of Liberians risking arrest to defend Burkina Faso's sovereignty or Ghanaians chanting for a foreign leader is a clarion call. Africans crave leaders who act decisively, speak truthfully, and deliver tangible results. Traoré's Burkina Faso, with its focus on education, health care, and food security despite Western sanctions, is proof that such leadership is not a pipe dream but a viable path forward. African leaders must recognize that the protests are not just about Traoré. They signal a tectonic shift in public consciousness. The youth, who form the majority of Africa's population, are no longer content with empty promises or recycled colonial frameworks like ECOWAS. They demand leaders who reject exploitative agreements, invest in local economies, and foster continental unity. Traoré's AES, a confederation built on mutual respect and shared goals, is a model that leaders must study and adapt. By contrast, those who cling to Western patronage or suppress dissent, as seen in Liberia's arrests, risk alienating their citizens and fueling unrest. The embarrassment of seeing their people march for a foreign leader should be a wake-up call to prioritize accountability over arrogance. To learn from Traoré, leaders must first humble themselves, acknowledging their shortcomings and engaging with their citizens' aspirations. They must dismantle systems that perpetuate dependency, redirect national wealth to the masses, and champion African solutions to African challenges. This requires courage to defy imperialist pressures and wisdom to build inclusive, transparent governance. The alternative, doubling down on ego-driven politics, will only deepen the chasm between rulers and the ruled, paving the way for more protests, uprisings, or even coups. The dawn of a new Africa is here, illuminated by Traoré's vision and the people's resolve. Leaders who embrace this moment, learning from his example, can steer their nations toward prosperity and pride. Those who refuse, blinded by pride, will find themselves relics of a fading era, overtaken by a continent ready to rise as one. I don't accept that under the law, the separate attempt that the police have the power to impose is the fact of the payment. Because the police officer right here, they're here, you can show it to them, they're right here. If this payment was not given to us, if I had the payment, under no circumstances, any tradition, any penal code, under the Constitution of Liberia, you can tell me that it raises concern. Because I know within myself we are not raising any concern. And under our freedom movement, we're not instructing anyone.